Hey, Chaos crew. Welcome back to Chaos and Caffeine, the only podcast where your lukewarm coffee is sacred. And we keep it real about the absolute whirlwind that is ADHD parenting. Today, I have an absolute rock star in the world of child psychiatry joining us, Dr. Willough Jenkins. This woman is not just another expert with a fancy title. She's a literal lifesaver for families navigating the ADHD roller coaster. Willough is the medical director of inpatient psychiatry at Rady's Children's Hospital in San Diego, a professor at UC San Diego, and an ADHD and child mental health powerhouse. Basically, when it comes to understanding our wild, wonderful, sometimes totally overwhelming kids, she gets it. So if you're drowning in parent guilt, second-guessing every decision, or just wondering how the hell to survive another meltdown, which literally isn't that all of us, stick around. Dr. Jenkins is about to break it all down with the knowledge, empathy, and real talk we so desperately need. So grab your caffeine, find a hiding spot, and let's do this. Dr. Jenkins, welcome to Chaos and Caffeine.
Thank you so much for having me.
So it's later in the afternoon, but I need to know what is in your cup currently.
Oh my gosh, I actually have a cup because it is morning for me. I'm on the West
Oh, it
Coast.
is.
So I have an espresso pod and I had a
Mm.
French vanilla this morning. So very fancy over here.
I love it. So I need to know what brought you to your line of work.
Oh, it's such a good question. So I'm a child psychiatrist, and in becoming a child psychiatrist, you go through medical school. So I'm a medical doctor first. And then when I was in my medical training, I very much enjoyed working with patients who had mental health concerns. And so initially I was working, of course, with adult patients, and I was working with very sick patients, a lot of times with addiction issues and illnesses like schizophrenia. And when I would meet with these adults and talk to them, they would share stories dating back to their childhood and talk
Mm.
about maybe how their first interaction with psychiatry hadn't been all that positive, or how they maybe got put off and then didn't re-engage with psychiatry services until much later in life. And when I was working with those patients, I always was thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I had met them earlier. I wish I had been the first person that they met. And so I ended up doing a child psychiatry rotation in medical school and loved it, loved all of the people that I was working with, the patients, the parents, and made a big switch and ended up doing adult psychiatry and then child psychiatry training on top of it. So that is the very quick Coles Note version, because if anything, there are so many reasons why you end up doing what you do, some we're not always aware of. But that's the very quick story of how I became a child psychiatrist.
Yes, I love that so much. And what is it that you have found that has surprised you in switching from adults to children?
Gosh, well, there's so much joy and so much hope in working with children. And I think that's something that gets lost sometimes when you hear about a child who's suffering or struggling with a mental health condition or a mental health issue. It's easy to forget that they do get better. And it is so rewarding and so wonderful to be able to partner with them and their family on that journey and
Mm.
help them kind of find the path through. And working with kids so early in life, you know that you're preventing or saving them from years of maybe more struggle because you are able to catch and teach things early. So for me, that has been one of the most rewarding things. And I think people forget that I wouldn't have a job if people didn't get better. So we have a wonderful success story with kids.
Yeah,
And kids do fantastic and surprise me all the time.
yeah. I love that so much. So I am doing a very delicate balancing dance of teaching my child the skills that he needs to succeed, but also trying to help him not internalize all of the redirection. So it seems like some days, I'm like, we have to push through, and then other days I'm like, eh. So what advice do you have for me directly, but many other parents who are
Oh,
struggling with that?
Well, firstly, I want to say that like a lot of people always assume as a psychiatrist that I love giving advice, but I actually don't because I really think that sometimes you as a parent, you really know a lot of what's right for you and your family already. So I really much prefer the role of guiding or providing ideas and then working with you rather than directly saying you must do this.
Yeah.
So that's always my caveat. And then it's always a little bit of irony because of course as you know, I make some videos on social media where I do give a little bit of advice, but the idea being that it's just adding tools to your toolkit, and then you can pick as a parent which works best for your child in the situation. Um, though, to answer your actual question, though, of how to kind of strike that balance, I do think that one thing I always try to remind myself as a parent myself, I have two kids, is trying to keep some consistency as much as possible and balancing that with flexibility, like you mentioned, can be a challenge. So I try to be fairly intentional with my kids if we're being flexible in a situation or doing something that's a little different than what we normally do, and highlight it for them so that I can return back to that consistency that we have set up. So a classic example was we were just on vacation, and on vacation everything's different, bedtimes different, expectations are different, we have way more screen time, but we're very clear about like, oh well, in this moment it's vacation, when we're back home and back in our regular schedule, the standard expectations and things come back in.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's helpful, but I think, of course, we're not always going to be automatrons and following a schedule exactly. But if you can let your child in on the fact that things are going different and for what reason, I think that can be helpful.
No, I think a couple of things in there was really helpful. One, I need to remember often that I am the expert on my child. I forget that. I'm often looking for external resources to guide me or validate what I'm doing. And really, just like you said, I know him best. So that was one. And the other is I need to be more flexible, even when we're not on vacation. I need to remind myself, like, if the dishes aren't done right away, everything's going to work out.
Mhm. Yes, I think as parents, for sure, flexibility is such a skill that a lot of us have to learn because things do not go as planned.
Yeah. So when a family comes to you, or maybe we should start there, how would a family get to you?
Mm. So there's a few different ways in the United States that you can see a child psychiatrist. You can directly see a child psychiatrist by calling, going to your local list of child psychiatrists. They are listed in pretty much every state, and connecting with somebody directly. That's always an option. But the more common path to see a child psychiatrist is a child has some type of a mental health concern, and they go and see their pediatrician first. And a lot of people don't realize that pediatricians know a lot about children's behavioral concerns, mental health issues, and are a really great gauge for, hey, this is pretty normal, this is pretty typical, or actually, let's get you some more help. So I really recommend families start with their pediatrician. And then the pediatrician will place like a referral or help guide a family to see a child psychiatrist. So that's probably the typical path. Some other families, though, will go through therapy first, like maybe at school, a concern was identified. They started working with a school therapist or a school counselor. And then that therapist might say, you know what, I'd really love to get the additional expertise, help, support of a child psychiatrist, and then direct them that way. So there's definitely a few different paths to CS, but it's much more common to go through your pediatrician.
And what are some of the issues that may arise that a therapist or a pediatrician would say, hey, we need some extra support here?
Yeah, there's a few different things. I mean, one is if what's going on for the child is unclear. So if they're not sure, is it anxiety? Is it ADHD? Did they have a really difficult upbringing? Could that be a factor here? So a lot of times we get patients when it's just that it's not as straightforward or there's still questions about what might be going on for them. So we call that like the assessment and diagnosis piece, which is a big, big aspect of what we do as child psychiatrists. The other piece that happens is maybe a child has been getting help. They have been seeing a therapist for a while and they're hitting a little bit of a roadblock. It's just not working as would be expected, or the direction's not going the way that the therapist is thinking. And they might say, oh, let's see if you can see a child psychiatrist. And are there any other ways we can support you aside from therapy? Of course, as child psychiatrists, we do medication management and prescribe medication. That is an aspect of what we do, which is different from other mental mental health professionals. So that can be something that can be incorporated for a lot of different kids, depending on where they're at. And so those are probably some of the main reasons. Or I guess the other piece to mention is if a child's really in crisis, a lot of times they'll just quickly kind of get the child into seeing a child psychiatrist quickly, just to make sure that we get all of the resources possible for that child immediately, just because it might be more time sensitive issue.
That is something that I was not aware of happening. Fortunate is not the right term, I'm sure, but sometimes when I speak with other parents who are parenting ADHD children, I realize that my son has a mild to moderate case.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not recognize that there were actually some parents out there who have to go as far as inpatient just to feel safe in their home.
Well, I think it is really important. And obviously, in this space, too, like we're talking about giving advice, realizing that even with the same diagnosis or the same label, the struggles, the journey is going to be really, really different, and to be really mindful of that. I do
Yeah.
work in a hospital setting. So I do work in an emergency room. So I see families coming in crisis every single day with different struggles. And it can be really isolating to be that family and not realizing that actually that's relatively common. The
Yeah.
emergency room we work at, we get about 30 children coming in a day with a behavioral health crisis. So it's
Wow.
much more common than people realize. And in some ways it is can be a really efficient way to get on top of things and to get help really fast. So I never want a family to discourage a family from getting that type of help, because it is
Absolutely.
out there and is available.
And then that's the other part. They're like, I feel so guilty. I
Mhm.
can't send my child away. But I'm like, you're living in misery. I don't think there's any guilt there. You're fearful in your own home. But it's so easy for me to say that because I have not experienced.
Yes, I think too, like obviously as a parent, you try to do the best for your child, and it's really hard to acknowledge that there's certain things that no matter what you did, you can't control, which is why I think having professional support, speaking to somebody like myself or a therapist who's really seen families go through this journey, can provide a lot of reassurance. Like, this isn't on you. This wasn't a mistake you made parenting. This isn't something you did wrong. This wasn't something you ate during pregnancy, or every other thing that I've heard that especially mothers and fathers too really hold on to is I've caused this or I did something
Yeah.
wrong. And I think speaking to other families who've obviously been there and professionals can really help, because truthfully, it really isn't anybody's fault.
Yeah.
There's no blame in this. There's always strategies and, as you know, like parenting tips and things that you can learn to help. But it's very, very rarely that somebody didn't do something, and that's why their child has a certain struggle.
Yeah.
It's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah. I know it would be really hard for you to walk me through the exact path, but say a family has come to you, and I know that that may be challenging because you're referencing from the ER. But once a family gets to you, kind of what is the procedure to get them back on track?
Well, I guess it would depend on like what they're struggling with. So I do hospital work, but I also do have an outpatient practice. So how it works is a family would come in and see me for an assessment. And in general, for children, they're about 2-hour assessments. So really question heavy. We're trying to ask you about everything. We're asking about development, medical conditions, making sure there's nothing else going on that could be causing the symptoms, and then going through a whole bunch of different mental health concerns and conditions, some which are going to be applicable and some which aren't at
Yeah.
all. But we have to ask to really make sure that we get a really good picture of what's going on. So the first is usually an assessment. And then sometimes we may have enough information at the end of that to be able to say, hey, this is what we think's going on. Sometimes we're like, you know what, maybe we need to call your school. Maybe we need to talk to somebody else. Maybe we need to talk to the therapist or the pediatrician that sent you to us. So it can be a little bit of a process to really complete that full assessment and give you an idea of what we think is going on.
Mm.
I personally think that's good because it's thorough and really means that we're trying to give you the most accurate picture that we
Yeah.
can. And then after the assessment process, like I say, you'll be presented with a diagnosis. Let's just use that term loosely. I know that some people kind of stiffen up a bit against hearing that word, but a description of what we think is going on for your child. And I should say, we don't always give children a diagnosis. If there isn't one, we certainly don't have to give your child a
Yeah.
diagnosis. We might say, oh, they struggle a little bit with this. And then what we do is we come up with a very comprehensive plan for how to help your child. And so that plan will include things like lifestyle factors, looking at your diet, looking at exercise, looking at socialization, looking at how we can emphasize their strengths. We'll look at things at school. How can we help in school? Is there issues that are coming up there? Are there ways school could support
Mm.
better? Then obviously looking at the role for therapy. For most children, therapy is a big part, but there's a lot of different types of
Yeah.
therapy. So helping guide like what might be the right fit as well. And then of course, if appropriate, if it's the place, looking at whether medication could be an option or educating you about when it might be an option. One of the biggest misconceptions I think is so important for me to say is child psychiatrists are not just about medication or pushing medication on anybody. There is no reason I have to write a prescription for any child. And I have many children that I follow in my practice who are not on medication treatment. And that's very typical of child psychiatrists.
Yeah.
So I just want to emphasize that because it is a big barrier, I think, to sometimes people coming to see a child psychiatrist because they think, oh, I don't want my child on medication. I don't need to see a psychiatrist, not realizing how much more we really do than just that
Yeah.
aspect.
Why do you think that is? Why are people so afraid of the medication talk?
Well, there's a lot in the news currently
Yeah.
that might be giving us a few clues as to why that could be. Joking aside, though, I think obviously mental health still has a lot of stigma, and it has. It's one of the places that's not as black and white as other areas of medicine. And sometimes in that nuance and in that gray, there can be it can be misinterpreted as not having answers or not having good evidence or not having good
Yeah.
research, when actually that's not the case. So I think a lot of it does unfortunately come back to stigma. And honestly, there is just a lot of misinformation currently out there about psychiatric medication, about mental health
Yeah.
conditions. And unfortunately, some people are really capitalizing on that fear. And so we have to be really looking to experts and really looking to people to provide us guidance. And that's why sitting down and talking to someone individually about you, your situation, your child, your family, your priorities is so much more valuable than watching a social media video talking about a
Yeah.
medication. Um, so that's my opinion. I don't know if you have thoughts on kind of why it is coming from the parent aspect, but that's some of the things I've heard.
So I am a Southern gal. I know you can hear this Appalachian accent. And I feel like, and maybe this is the entire country and not just Southerners, but to me, a lot of parents are still like ADHD is the invisible disorder. You can't see it. And then it's like, I don't want to medicate my child for just being a boy or those things. And I'm like, yeah, but they're struggling.
I think that's a really true point. And like you said about the struggles not being seen. And a lot of times, some of the struggles children have with ADHD aren't even seen by their
Yeah.
parents. And especially for girls, a lot of it's very an internal struggle. And it's so much more than just about schoolwork. I know you know this, but I think it's so important just to kind of emphasize that it extends to how you make friends, your social
Yes.
situation, how you engage in hobbies and other activities. It doesn't just affect one thing. And then I know, obviously, one of the great things about social media is a lot of people have been so vocal about how not getting treatment really stunted their development, really harmed them,
Yes.
really didn't help. They didn't reach their potential that they could have once they got treatment. So I really ask parents when they're hesitant to allow somebody who is a professional in the space to help with the decision and also really account for what their child's saying as
Yeah.
well. Of course, very young children may not have as much of an opinion, but elementary school age children, they can tell when something's different or that they're struggling in school. Um, I do always like to share a story. I had a young patient who came in with a very, to my eyes, straightforward case of ADHD. And He really liked school, but he was doing terribly. He
Mm.
was, I think it was grade 3 or grade 4. I can't quite remember the grade, and just, behind grade
Yeah.
level, like maybe having to repeat. And talked to the family, and we decided to put into place like a full ADHD treatment plan, which did include medication. We started the little boy on the treatment for ADHD, and he came back 2 months later and he was getting A's in his
Oh,
classes. Like because he loves school, he just wasn't able to attend and
yeah.
focus and process the information. And it was just one of the most wonderful stories. And there's so many like that,
Yes.
where once you get on the proper treatment, you go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize my child's potential. They're really, really thriving now. We've been able to address
Yeah.
everything, even though maybe it kind of seemed like they were doing okay before with their untreated
Mm.
ADHD. So there's lots to this conversation for sure.
Yes, not to stay on medication forever, but that is very parallel to my son's story. He struggled from first grade to fourth grade. We're currently in fourth grade. It was to the point where his teacher was like, he knows the material, but he cannot sit down long enough to get it on paper. But in the last 3 months, he has went from well below to above on almost every metric. So I hate that he struggled for so long,
Yeah.
but I'm so glad now that we are getting the help that he needed.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. Yeah, that's very similar to the one I have. And I
Yeah,
absolutely empathize and understand the fears parents have, particularly knowing the information that's out there right now.
yeah,
So I never shame or feel badly towards a family who's delayed making a decision too. We understand completely. But it is wonderful when you hear how well children do, because ADHD isn't about intelligence. A lot
yeah,
of people are brilliant with ADHD. So particularly if you see like things that are really being impacted, it
yeah,
might be a sign to think, gosh, are there other things we can do with our treatment for our child? And medication, like I've said, just being one of the many.
yeah. Looking for some new toys and tools that your ADHD kiddos will love? Play Therapy Supply has you covered with a great selection of toys, games, and fidgets that can be used by ADHD children, their parents, caregivers, and professionals alike. From fidget toys that help children calm down, de-stress, and focus, to social emotional learning resources to help kids understand their feelings and emotions, to games and activities designed to improve emotional regulation. Play Therapy Supply has it all. For thousands of items and fast and free shipping, visit playtherapysupply.com today. So you may not agree with this, but because he struggled for a couple of years, he started internalizing the constant redirection. He would say things like, I'm a bad kid. And so I had a choice to make. We actually started making lighthearted comments about how boring it would be to fit into the box. Of course, I've asked him to never say that to, another child who does fit into the box. But I kind of want your take on that. How can we help our children not internalize that and feel like they're constantly messing up? Because I know their redirection is there.
I think that is so common. And that is the biggest fear, right? Is that a child starts to feel like they're not good enough, they're bad, they're always in trouble, they're the bad kid in the class.
Yeah.
And to be totally fair, sometimes that is how they have been viewed, right?
Yeah.
Especially when people maybe haven't understood what their struggle has been. So, one of the biggest gifts sometimes of getting a diagnosis or getting a description is it allows people to approach your child with so much more empathy and understanding and correct some of those labels. Um, but what I think is so important as a parent is to really find the strengths for your child and really try to balance, even if you can't control some of the negative feedback they receive, really try to make sure they're getting as much positive feedback, even if it's in different areas.
Yeah.
Every child has strengths. Some children with ADHD are amazing athletes, not always, but then you can really give them a lot of accolades for some of those other achievements. So that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And like you said, just talking it through, all of us are unique. Not not one of our brains is the same.
Yeah.
ADHD brain or not, we all have different brains. We all have different strengths. We are all unique. And that, like you said, is absolutely appropriate. It's what makes us all interesting. If we were all the same, oh my goodness, how boring.
Yeah.
We also never get anything done. No
Yeah.
inventions would be made. Nobody would be thinking. So I think that's absolutely appropriate to highlight some of the strengths of the ADHD brain. I will say, because it comes up, a lot of times people have kind of thought, oh, maybe I should say, like, to my child, their ADHD is a superpower, or it's really, really positive. We've gone away from that a little bit, though, because ADHD comes with a lot of struggles and it does make things really hard. And hearing it's a superpower can kind of minimize things. It can be confusing to children when things have really been difficult or challenging for them.
Yeah.
So we don't use that term very much anymore, but absolutely some of the creative strengths that they can have, pour all the praise into that.
Yeah.
I think is really important. Keeping their self-esteem up is just huge for any child, any child.
Yeah. So maybe not tell them, that ADHD is a superpower, but maybe that the hyper focus that comes with ADHD is the superpower.
It can be something that's really useful. If you
Yeah.
learn how to harness that and control that, you have the ability to think so in depth about different things and really go into an interest in so much detail. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so those are kind of the ways that I like to frame things. And it absolutely can be a strength. There can be ways that certain traits of ADHD can be used to people's advantage and help them with their success.
Yeah.
But then there's also the reality that there's some parts of it, especially when you're in traditional school, that can just
Mm.
be really hard.
So, speaking of traditional school, I want to preface this by saying that my son has an amazing teacher. He has had an amazing journey through school, even though the academic has been hard. He's had some really great support. His principal is amazing. My biggest fear right now is that she will retire before I get him out of elementary school.
Mhm.
What are some ways that we can support them inside of this box that they were not meant to fit in?
Well, I think one, making sure that we give our teachers and school credit. A lot of schools and teachers have done a lot of more education on ADHD. They have a lot of skills. They may have resources within the school. So being really open-minded and approaching your school to see what they can offer. Because like you said, some schools actually do an amazing job. And other
Yeah.
schools may struggle in other areas. So not making assumptions and seeing what your school already has in place. Like I said, I think one of the biggest things is just education, and letting, especially your child's teacher, know what's going on for them, what their struggles are. It's gotten a lot better, but before parents would be really reluctant to share their child's diagnosis with their teacher for fears that it would be used against them or hold them back. Luckily, that seems to be changing a lot, but sometimes that's still there, not wanting their child to be labeled
Yeah.
or seen as different, but really it allows a teacher to, maybe provide some extra attention or cues or preferential seating or like all of the amazing accommodations that children with ADHD can really benefit from so that it can be successful. So
Yeah.
I think yeah, that can be really key. And then of course there's formalized ways through 504 plans and IEPs to really get some of these accommodations and services in place for your child. And I think it is really important to explore all of that and know, oh, would this help us?
Yeah.
Would this be beneficial?
I love that. We actually have a 504 plan, and outside of medication, I do believe that is the other component. Outside of his effort, he is trying
Mhm.
exceptionally hard. I think that the 504 medication and effort combination is what has brought him to where we need to be.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like, just in a lot of different mental health conditions, sometimes the medication piece just allows them to access the effort and the skills and for all the therapy and everything else to click.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of times I've had children who've maybe been in therapy for a few years and things haven't really started to stick or be able to be enacted. And then we use another tool like a medication option, and all of a sudden, oh, they're able to use all those skills. So for
Yeah.
conditions that aren't like ADHD, like anxiety, that might mean, hey, they don't actually need to be on the medication for that long. Now their brains are able to process all of the information. We can learn, our brains can grow. And it's not something that they have to be on all the time too. So
Yeah.
there's so many different options.
Yes, there are the few parents that come to me and they're like, I'm afraid to medicate. It's like, have you tried everything else? Have you tried therapy or working with a school counselor to get accommodations? Have you tried everything else? And if your answer is no, then start there. But if your answer is yes, you might be holding them back from the one thing, that one tool that can help them get where they want to be.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, ADHD is such a biologically based condition as well. We know that so clearly that there are families too that realize maybe they've gone through their own journey and they have a parent who is taking medication and realize how helpful it is. And they come, they're like, you know what? That's what we want to start with. We'd like to try medication. We know it's so helpful. We know it's the most effective thing for treatment.
Yeah.
And that's okay too.
Yeah.
And I think too, maybe the one other thing I will say, just because I've heard this kind of idea of like medicate children, and I don't mean to pick on your words, but I think we don't say that about any other medical condition. We don't say,
Yeah.
oh, medicate your diabetes with insulin. It's a term that has a little bit of stigma that's used really only for mental health conditions. So I always try
Mm,
to reframe and say, treatment for just the same as you would your treatment for your asthma, your treatment for your diabetes,
yes.
because the word just has a slight negative connotation, which I do understand. It seems like drugging your child, like it
Yeah.
doesn't sound positive at all.
Yeah.
So I always try to just have a gentle kind of recorrection over that frame term as well, just because I know that, yeah, if you keep saying things that are negative, you start to believe it too.
Thank you for that reframe. I will definitely try to remember treatment instead of medicate. Oh, that's so
That was so
good.
common, so common.
Yeah, it is. It really is. So, one last question on school. We
Mhm.
know that ADHD kids work twice as hard, twice as much effort just to function in the neurotypical world, and sometimes that leads to burnout. So, how can we recognize that? What are some warning signs? And then hopefully to get them out of it if they're already there.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like one of the pieces that immediately comes to mind with that question is children with ADHD are also very much prone to anxiety, also very much prone to depression and mood disturbances. So when we talk about like ADHD burnout, it's kind of a general term that incorporates maybe all of
Mm,
those things. So looking for signs that your child could be struggling, like they're really having a lot of harder time sleeping. Maybe they're really, really irritable when they get home. um, and for children, irritability is one of the key signs of a mood problem. Everybody thinks, oh, depression's a sad child or a child who's crying. And it really could be a very irritable child, a child who's having a lot of
yeah.
outbursts. And so it gets missed a lot. So when you start to see like changes in your child's sleep, their appetite, their mood, or maybe they're not doing the things they used to enjoy. They just don't have the energy for it. Like maybe they loved building Legos and you're like, oh, that's odd. They haven't built that new Lego set. It's just been kind of sitting around. That's kind of
Yeah.
unusual. That might be some indication that they are feeling really overwhelmed. So I think obviously trying to be proactive, and in this day and age, I think every child is getting overscheduled. It seems like if you don't have an activity after school, that's unusual these days. So, really being mindful of your child's schedule and watching the weekends too. They may need some downtime, they may need some time to rest and relax and to do
Yeah.
things. And a lot of people with ADHD have a hard time unwinding at the best of times. So, teaching them skills and ways to find that rest and relaxation can be really key. I know sports are a big thing for kids with ADHD. They can be helpful in so many ways, but also just some of the more calmer, like meditative physical activities. Of course, yoga, meditation, that can be very challenging for a child with
Yeah.
ADHD. But if they can learn to do some of these practices, it can be so helpful and such an important skill to help from exactly what you're saying, times when they really are feeling overwhelmed.
That is one thing that my kid is really great at advocating for. He's like, Mom, I don't have any me time today. I guess I want your opinion on this. His downtime, his me time is a quick dopamine off of YouTube Kids. Is that wrong? Like, if that is his way to unwind, or am I setting him up for failure in the future?
Oh my goodness, I smile because nothing's wrong. I feel like it's all about balance and what works for you. I mean, screen time and ADHD is like a huge, huge discussion. And I know for a lot of my patients with ADHD, screen time becomes a very tricky thing to balance as a
Yeah.
family, particularly. And trying to find structure and balance around that can become just a huge struggle within a family. And so, it just really depends. If your child's watching 10 minutes of some lighthearted YouTube kids, gosh, that's not no problem and feels better after, and the content's
Yeah.
appropriate, wonderful. I think we've all done that where we put on a funny sitcom, to help unwind. So it's really just what's working for you, and it's all about, like just balance. Like you don't want a child spending 10 hours a day on
Yeah.
YouTube. A little bit of time, of course, that's fine. And having other activities too. So, if your child uses YouTube to unwind, then is there other skills that they have as well that when maybe YouTube isn't available,
Yeah.
that they're able to kind of jump on? So, um, yeah, so no, nothing with parenting except for, obviously
Yeah.
clear abuse stuff is ever really wrong. It's just about what's working for you and finding that balance so that your child's just got a
Yeah.
well-rounded life.
I will say that I think kids today use tablets as TV, where we used to plop down in front of Saturday morning cartoons. It feels like that's what most of the kids are doing. They're watching TV shows on a tablet. So I don't know how to balance that, but when I was little, it was okay to watch some TV time. So I don't feel guilty about that. I just don't want that to be, like you said, his only coping or unwinding mechanism.
Yeah. And we do know that, like, if you can, like, if a child is watching shows, if you can put it on a TV, it is a little bit better because the tablet, they get very, what's the right word, but very
Yeah.
focused. Whereas with a TV, you're open to kind of other things that are happening
Yeah.
in the room. That can be helpful too. And also on a tablet, you have less control as a parent over what
Yeah.
they're doing because you can't see as well as a
Yeah.
TV. So there's lots of tips and kind of around that. But it's like, yeah, of course, watching a television show is okay. Make sure you go outside and run around a little bit too. Make sure you see a friend once in a
Yeah.
while. It's just as we all are trying to make sure we have full and balanced lives and don't get sucked into all of the tech that competes for our
For
attention.
sure. I am currently the mean mom because and I don't believe this, but this is exactly how he feels. He's like, Mom, everyone in my class has adult YouTube except for me. And then I hear my dad coming out and I'm like, well, I'm not their mom. But no, I don't agree
Yeah.
with that. But that's currently our biggest struggle is I'm the mean mom because he doesn't have access to YouTube.
Oh, I can relate because obviously in my line of work, I'm probably more restrictive about things with my
Yeah.
own kids. And so we're really clear. Different families have different rules. The kids know what I do for work. So I'm like, guys, I'm never going to make a decision for you that's going to hurt you. I'm your mom. Like I'm always going to do what I think is
Yeah.
best. And this is just something that I just don't think we're ready for. And like YouTube, adult YouTube, you can see some pretty terrible things on that. So I understand your
Mhm.
apprehension.
Uh, so that we've already covered like my next question about screen time. So accidentally, so I'm going to skip down to emotional regulation because I feel
Yeah.
like that's so hard for ADHD parents, probably because over 50% of us also have ADHD. So it's like the blind leading the blind. But other than the yoga and meditation that you mentioned, what are some ways that I can teach him that while hopefully modeling that?
Well, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head when you said making sure that you're modeling it yourself, because I think that is how children learn really the most is when you show, and also talking through what you're going through. It's not something that naturally adults do if they're having a frustrating or a difficult day, but our children are
Yeah.
watching. And so saying like, I'm feeling really frustrated about this, even though of course it might be
Yeah.
obvious. I notice I'm trying to clean the kitchen really frantically right now. I'm frustrated. I'm going to take a couple deep
Yeah.
breaths. I think I'm going to have a snack and go step outside and then I'm going to come back. So even just talking through your own process, whatever
Yeah.
it is, can be super helpful for kids to go, oh, that's how mom dealt with that. Nobody likes a lecture. Nobody really likes to be actually told what to do. So if you can show whenever you can, that is absolutely key. I think one of the things that's just the cornerstone of emotional regulation is making sure your child can identify their emotions and label their emotions. And kids these days are really good at
Yeah.
that, but sometimes they still struggle too, and picking up on other people's emotional states. So that's kind of the
Mm,
basis if they can identify how they're feeling. And then, like I said, my biggest kind of thing that I always talk about is building a toolkit, like a coping kit of what you can do to help regulate when you're feeling upset. And what you do for when you're feeling worried might be different than when you feel angry.
yeah.
And so, meditation, yoga, of course, deep breathing, there's muscle relaxation techniques, there's a lot of sensory things that can be really helpful, especially because kids with ADHD have a hard time with some of the kind of like internal mentalization type
Yeah.
activities, like, visual imagery can be kind of difficult to get a child to do. So if there's something very tactile or that they can do, so like engaging the five senses is kind of a classic one. Going outside, I think exercise is really, really helpful, even if it's a let's take a break and do five jumping
Yeah.
jacks. So figuring out what works the best for your child, and then just modeling it the best you can, and also not beating yourself up if you don't do it perfectly all of the time, because none of us
Yeah.
do.
You literally took the next question right out from under me because
It's like I know about this.
because that I honestly I don't struggle with it as much as I used to. I used to give myself a really hard time for when I did lose it or lose my cool. And I'm getting much, much better about that. But that seems to be a really common plight of of ADHD parents. They're like, I feel so guilty. And I'm like, yeah, but you can say you're sorry and show them what reconciliation and repair means and then move on. But they don't listen to me. So I want you to tell them how can moms manage their mom guilt?
Oh gosh. Well, I think first off, like society right now puts so much pressure on us as moms to do everything right. And you open up Instagram, you're going to be inundated with the 10 parenting things you must do, or else your child is terrible. I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing. But there's so much information right now and so much pressure. It is really important to remind yourself that there is no perfect parent. We are all just doing our best. And one of my favorite terms is you just have to be good enough,
Mm,
just good enough. Get it right most of the time. That's the goal. You can't be perfect. Nobody's perfect.
yeah.
And like you said, how you act when you do mess up is the key thing. And that's what's realistic for life. A child that grew up in a home with just everyone who did everything perfect wouldn't know how to react when something went
That
wrong
is
either.
true.
So there is value in seeing an adult particularly acknowledge, hey, I made a mistake, and talking to their child openly about it. And I think that's the best thing that you can do. If you yelled, go, gosh, mom really lost her cool there. I'm sorry. I'm working on this skill too. I want you to know that I didn't X mean that, just like really apologizing and showing that process. And then,
Yeah.
of course, you want to kind of show action behind that. And maybe next time, things go a little differently, or you come up with a plan that's different. But we really do need to take the pressure off. I think it's really affecting a lot of moms with their own mental health right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's creating a pressure cooker, which is no good for anybody. It's not good for families.
Yeah. I agree, but it's so much easier said than done. And I really don't know what happened. I mean, I guess I did. I started, therapy and meditating myself, so maybe that's given me some grace, but it's like old me would be crying herself to sleep,
Mhm.
and I'm
Oh,
like, stop doing that. But like I said, it's easier said than done.
it is. I mean, one of the classic tricks is what would you tell your good friend if they came to you saying what they did? And then just make sure you're saying the same thing to yourself and being as kind to yourself as you are to your good friends.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a mind trick for how to help. But I think it's something we all struggle with, myself included. I always say, I'm not a perfect parent either, even though I have all of the knowledge and I
Yeah.
really should know what to do. It's just impossible to get it
Yeah.
right all of the time. And that's absolutely okay.
Yeah. Earlier, when you said you take a break and get a snack and you model that,
Mhm.
it made me think about my son. He has been able to recognize when he is hangry and he's like, Mom, I need a break. I'm a little
Mhm.
hungry. And I'm like, yes, I'm so proud of you for verbalizing that instead of losing your cool because mom's working on that myself.
Yes. No, that's such a win. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. You have to celebrate that self-awareness and recognition. That's amazing.
Yeah. He is amazing. He's doing so well. I'm so proud of him. So
Sounds like
I could do this all day. I mean, I really could. This is the podcast being my job is so selfish because I get to learn everything that I want to know as a parent. But I want to be respectful of your time. So before we go, I want you to tell people where they can reach you and learn so much more.
Yes, no, I really appreciate the opportunity and your questions, and also just want to appreciate your transparency and sharing your journey for other families. It means so much when there's a parent who's telling you kind of what they went through with their own child. So I always feel like this is the best way to get education out when I'm coming in as the expert and then having you obviously as an expert as well, but also a parent. I
Mm.
feel like it's just so wonderful. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I do create content, so I can be found on pretty much all the social media platforms, including YouTube, and I'm at Dr. Willough Jenkins, WILLOUGH, and then JENKINS, and I'd love to connect. Yeah, lots of good information. Love to meet some of you.
That is actually how I found Dr. Jenkins, so I highly recommend looking her up. And we will, of course, link all of those in the show notes for listeners. So, selfishly, one last question. What could we do today that could help our kiddos' mental health?
Oh my gosh, my quick flippant answer to you is take care of yourself. But I truly,
Oh,
truly do think that the best thing we can do for our kids is acknowledge our own struggles and
mm,
make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. So, my very quick for anyone listening, the best thing you can do for your kid is do something for yourself today. Go for a walk, go have a nice shower, listen to some music in the car, and make sure that you're filling your own cup. And yeah, that would be my parting advice. It gets overlooked too much.
that was very unexpected, but so, so needed. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been
Yes.
wonderful today.
No, it's been so great to talk to you too.
Thank you. Whew, girl. I told y'all. Dr. Jenkins just took us to church, and if you're like me, you're walking away from this episode with a mix of relief, validation, and a desperate need to reheat my coffee for the 10th time today. Let's be real, this ADHD parenting thing is not for the weak, but the more we understand our kids, the better we can show up for them and ourselves. Dr. Jenkins just gave us some seriously game-changing insights, and if you loved this episode as much as I did, please make sure to share it with other fellow ADHD parent warriors. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss another episode of Chaos and Caffeine, where we embrace the mess, caffeinate the stress, and figure this parenting thing out together. Until next time, keep surviving, keep thriving, and remember, we've got this.